There is a sentence that every air power analyst on Earth has spent the last decade insisting was essentially impossible to write about. An adversary who had just watched their entire integrated radar-guided air defense network get destroyed by American suppression of enemy air defense missions. And yet, here we are writing it. Iran, whose S-300 batteries were eliminated in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury on February 28th, whose Bavar 373 sites were systematically hunted and destroyed across 40 days of the most intensive siege campaign in modern warfare history, whose radar network on Gorak Island was precisely targeted and destroyed by EA-18G Growler harm missiles after passively geolocating the systems in March, whose air defense infrastructure along the entire Strait of Hormuz was struck again on June 9th and 10th, that Iran hit a US F-35 Lightning II, the world's most advanced operational stealth fighter jet. Not claimed to have hit it, not released footage that analysts disputed, released footage that the military analysis community at Military Watch Magazine, Defense Express, the Defense News, 1945, and Defense Security Asia all confirmed as authentic, showing a US Air Force F-35A that had been struck by an Iranian surface-to-air weapon during a deep penetration mission over central Iran in March 2026. Diverting and landing at a U.S. base in the region with confirmed damage. And a month later, a Chinese-supplied manpads, confirmed by 3 U.S. intelligence officials to NBC News, struck and brought down an F-15E Strike Eagle over the Zagros Mountains, killing the most sophisticated twin-engine strike aircraft in the American Air Force's operational inventory and triggering the most complex combat search and rescue operation since Vietnam. And then, in June 2026, a Shahed one-way attack drone struck an AH-64 Apache helicopter over the Strait of Hormuz during a nominally active ceasefire. 3 engagements. 3 aircraft hit. 1 fifth-generation stealth fighter damaged in a way that every air force in the world that operates F-35s has been urgently studying since the footage surfaced. All of it accomplished by an air defense network that had been comprehensively destroyed at the radar-guided tier before any of these engagements occurred. So how did Iran do it? And what does the answer tell you about the fundamental assumption that has governed American air campaign strategy for 3 decades, that if you destroy the radar network, you own the airspace? That assumption may need significant revision, and the specific weapon that revised it in Iran's hands is not the S-300. It is not the Bavar 373. It is not a Chinese YLC-8B anti-stealth radar or a Russian S-400. It is a system that Iran built domestically, that weighs far less than a conventional surface-to-air missile battery, that does not emit a single radar pulse, and that the F-35's entire electronic warfare suite was specifically not designed to counter. It is the Majid AD-8. And after what happened over central Iran in March 2026, every air force in the world is now studying what it is and what it means. Let's build this from the foundation, because understanding why the Majid's engagement with the F-35 was so significant requires understanding the doctrine the F-35 was designed around. The F-35 Lightning II is the product of a design philosophy built around one core insight. The thing that makes an aircraft vulnerable to radar-guided surface-to-air missiles is the radar's ability to detect and track it, make the aircraft radar invisible, minimize its radar cross-section through shaping, radar-absorbent coatings, internal weapons bays, and careful management of every surface angle, and the radar-guided missile has no target to guide toward. This insight is correct, and it produced an aircraft that is genuinely extraordinary in its radar stealth. The F-35's radar cross-section in the high-frequency bands that conventional fire control radars use is approximately the size of a golf ball, a target so small that most radar systems operating at normal detection distances cannot resolve it into a coherent track. Against the radar-guided air defense systems that Iran possessed before Operation Epic Fury, the S-300s, the Bavar 373s, the Qadam al-Anbiya radar network, the F-35 was, for all practical purposes, invisible at the ranges that made engagement possible. CENTCOM's F-35s flew deep penetration missions into Iran on the opening night of Epic Fury. They struck IRGC command infrastructure within 40 miles of Tehran on June 10th. They have been operating over Iranian territory throughout this conflict without losses attributable to radar-guided fire. The doctrine works, but the doctrine has a specific and documented vulnerability. And it is the same vulnerability that has haunted stealth aircraft since the first B-2 Spirits flew combat missions. The aircraft is radar invisible. It is not infrared invisible. The F-35's Pratt & Whitney F-135 turbofan engine, producing 43,000 pounds of thrust with afterburner, generates a thermal signature that any electro-optical or infrared sensor can detect at ranges far shorter than the radar detection ranges the stealth shaping is designed to defeat, but at ranges that remain operationally significant. And that thermal signature does not change based on the aircraft's radar cross-section. The stealthiest aircraft in the world, is a heat source. You just have to look for it with the right sensor, at the right range, from the right geometry. The Majid AD-08 is the weapon Iran built to exploit exactly this. The Defense News described it when the system was first revealed at an Iranian defense exhibition in April 2021. An electro-optical and infrared sensor array with a detection range of approximately 9 miles, paired with an electro-optically guided missile with an engagement range of approximately 5 miles. The system has no radar component. It does not transmit any radio frequency emissions that the F-35's AN/ASQ-239 electronic warfare system, which is specifically designed to detect and classify radar threats, can detect, classify, or warn the pilot about. The passive detection is the entire point. An EO/IR system looks at the infrared environment around it using heat-seeking sensors. It identifies the hottest, brightest thermal source in its field of view. Over central Iran, at the altitude and airspeed of a deep penetration strike mission, an F-35 running its F-135 engine is an extraordinarily bright thermal source, visible to an EO/IR sensor at ranges that, while shorter than radar detection ranges, are sufficient for an engagement if the geometry is right and the operator is patient. Defense Security Asia confirmed the engagement directly. The March 2026 engagement occurred during escalating hostilities between the United States and Iran that began in late February, placing coalition aircraft in increasingly contested airspace where layered Iranian air defense systems were expected to operate at multiple ranges. During the mission over central Iran, the F-35A reportedly encountered air defense fire, consistent with a short-range surface-to-air missile strike, after which the aircraft diverted and landed safely at a U.S. base in the region, confirming that the damage was not catastrophic but operationally significant. The Defense News confirmed the Majid as the system. The Majid AD-08 short-range system composed of an EO/IR sensor with a range of 9 miles and an electro-optically guided missile with a range of 5 miles, and specifically flagged its passive design as the factor making it difficult to counter. Infrared-guided systems such as the Majid do not rely on radar emissions, making them less susceptible to electronic jamming and harder to detect. This reduces warning time for pilots and increases vulnerability during low-altitude or close-range operations. The 1945 analysis by Warrior Maven's Chris Osborne, a former Pentagon official, added the critical operational insight: the F-35 may have been flying at lower altitudes than it typically operates when the Majid engaged it, precisely because deep penetration strike missions against ground targets in central Iran require the aircraft to descend from the high altitudes where its thermal signature is less detectable to the lower altitudes where the weapon employment range requires it to be. The stealth advantage operates primarily at longer ranges. At shorter ranges, in the terminal engagement envelope of a system like the Majid, the physics of infrared detection produce a different result. Now, let's talk about the third corded system, because this is the other Iranian air defense platform that analysts flagged in connection with both the F-35 engagement and the subsequent F-15E shootdown. And it represents the mobile radar-guided component of Iran's surviving air defense capability that the CAD campaign did not fully eliminate. The New York Times, cited in the NY Post's reporting on the April 2026 F-15E shootdown, identified the third Cordad as a possible weapon used against the Strike Eagle, a mobile, medium-range, surface-to-air defense system that represents one of the more capable domestically produced Iranian air defense platforms. The third Cordad is different from the Majid in one critical way. It does use radar for target tracking, but it is a mobile system, truck-mounted, relocatable, and specifically designed to avoid the pattern of life signatures that make fixed radar sites identifiable to persistent ISR collection. Hiding the radar through camouflage, dispersal, and delayed activation, the delayed activation tactic mentioned in multiple CENTCOM briefings, is the operational approach that mobile systems like the third Corded use to survive in an environment where passive ISR collection would otherwise produce the targeting solution that kills them. Iran's SEID doctrine, adapted over years of watching how American forces handled Serbian air defenses in 1999 and Iraqi air defenses in 1991 and 2003, specifically built around keeping mobile systems silent until an American aircraft is within engagement range, and then activating briefly to fire. The EA-18G Growler's ALQ-218 passive receiver geolocates transmitting radars within milliseconds of the first emission. The HARM missile homes on the emission at Mach 2. The counter is to activate for the minimum time required to fire, ideally less time than the HARM needs to reach the launching radar. At extremely short ranges, with the aircraft nearly overhead, this is potentially achievable. The Palestine Chronicle's technical analysis of how Iran shot down the F-15E synthesized the multiple sensor types. Passive sensors, such as infrared and electro-optical systems, can identify aircraft through heat signatures or emissions, even when radar visibility is reduced. Once a target is detected, tracking may be maintained through integrated radar networks or short-range systems operating within overlapping coverage zones. The use of dispersed launchers reduces vulnerability to counterstrikes and allows for engagement from multiple positions, increasing the probability of a successful hit. The picture that emerges is not of a single air defense system defeating American stealth technology. It is of a layered passive and active architecture where the infrared and electro-optical systems do the initial detection and tracking without emitting anything that the F-35's electronic warfare system can warn about, and the radar-guided systems activate only at the last possible moment from mobile platforms whose locations have been periodically changed to deny the ISR collection the stable targeting data it needs. And then the Russian dimension adds the third layer. The Defense News confirmed in its analysis of the F-35 engagement that leaked documents from February 2020 indicate that the Iranian Ministry of Defense signed a $580 million agreement with Russia for the procurement of 9K-333 Verba man-portable air defense systems, MANPADS. The 9K-333 Verba is Russia's most advanced shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile system, using a 3-channel optical seeker that simultaneously tracks targets in 3 infrared wavelengths, plus ultraviolet, making it significantly more resistant to countermeasures than older single-channel infrared seekers. It cannot be effectively decoyed by standard pyrotechnic flares because the 3-channel seeker processes the spectral characteristics of the heat source it is tracking. A flare's spectral profile is different from a jet engine's, and the Verba's seeker can distinguish between them. The $580 million contract covers what appears to be a substantial quantity of these systems, thousands of individual launchers and missiles, representing a capability that cannot be countered by electronic jamming, cannot be detected in advance by radar warning receivers, and whose operators, once distributed across the terrain profiles that deep penetration strike missions must transit, create an engagement geometry that every F-35 pilot flying over Iran has had to factor into their mission planning since March 2026. Defense security. Asia's analysis of the Majid engagement noted, as a result, analysts assess that operational planning may require adjustments, including revised flight profiles, increased use of standoff weapons where available, and enhanced countermeasures against infrared-guided threats. That assessment understates the scope of what is being revisited. The F-35's entire value proposition in a contested airspace environment is built around its ability to penetrate and strike targets that conventional aircraft cannot reach without being shot down. If the Iranian passive infrared architecture, the Majid, the Verba manpads, the distributed EO-IR sensor network, imposes a meaningful probability of engagement on F-35 missions even after the radar network has been destroyed, the cost-benefit analysis of sustained deep penetration operations changes in ways that affect everything from munitions, inventory planning, to the specific risk accepted in targeting decisions. The Guardian's timeline of the 2 U.S. aircraft shot down puts the stakes in the starkest possible terms. An F-15E Strike Eagle and an A-10 Thunderbolt II were hit within days of each other in early April 2026, the first confirmed losses of U.S. aircraft in Iran since the war began on February 28th. The F-15E down in the Zagros Mountains. The A-10 hit during the search and rescue mission for the F-15E crew, making it to Kuwaiti airspace before its pilot ejected safely. 3 pilots involved, all rescued, all alive. But the Guardian's summary captures the operational significance precisely. The incidents put the U.S. on notice that Iranian air defenses may not be as degraded as the Trump administration has broadly claimed. And the specific weapon that NBC News' 3 intelligence officials confirmed brought down the F-15E, a Chinese manpads, consistent with the 9K-53 Verba's operational doctrine of passive infrared engagement without radar emission, is the confirmation that the passive infrared threat is not theoretical. It is confirmed combat history. Sandbox's technical analysis, written in April 2026, explained the mechanism in terms that make the vulnerability concrete. While stealth fighters are much more survivable against high-end threats like those S-300 batteries when flying at low altitudes to hunt for Iranian weapons, the F-35's massive Pratt & Whitney F-135 turbofan engine makes for a very detectable infrared target at low altitudes. That's why we've already seen an F-35 getting directly hit from a manpad earlier in this conflict. Taking these kinds of systems out is paramount to establishing air superiority. It makes it feasible to fly more freely inside enemy airspace for both stealth and non-stealth jets alike. But even once you've taken out all the long-range threats and neutered the enemy's ability to scramble fighters against you, there is still a lot left to an adversary. Once the major air defense threats have been wiped out, fighters can be tasked with hunting hidden weapon systems, which often means flying at lower altitudes and airspeeds. The specific operational dynamic Sandbox describes aircraft descending from safe high-altitude profiles to the lower altitudes required for weapons employment against ground targets is the same dynamic that the Majid AD-08's 9-mile detection range and 5-mile engagement range becomes operationally relevant against. The high-altitude stealth profile defeats radar. The low-altitude weapons employment profile enters the Majid's passive infrared detection envelope. Iran's engineers understood this geometry when they built the Majid in 2021. They deployed it to exploit exactly this vulnerability in March 2026. And then Armenia's Republic Day parade on May 28, 2026, added the final intelligence piece that ties everything together. Army recognition confirmed. On May 28, 2026, Armenia displayed at least 2 Iranian-made AD-08 Majid short-range air defense systems during the Republic Day parade in Yerevan, revealing a configuration not previously seen outside Iran. Unlike the original Majid unveiled in April 2021, the Armenian variant combined the standard electro-optical fire control suite with a planar array radar mounted on the launcher. That upgrade, adding a planar array radar to the EO-IR foundation, addresses exactly the limitations that analysts had identified with the original passive-only design. The Armenian configuration appears to represent a more complete and potentially export-oriented variant that combines passive sensors with active surveillance, potentially addressing limitations associated with adverse weather, low-signature targets, and the field of view constraints of electro-optical sensors. Iran is not just fielding the system domestically. It is exporting it. Armenia, a country that recently concluded a military partnership with India and is actively diversifying its defense procurement away from Russia, is now operating the Majid variant. The system that engaged the world's most advanced stealth fighter in combat is now being deployed to militaries beyond Iran's own armed forces, potentially with enhanced capability over the version that struck the F-35 in March 2026. Here's the honest strategic assessment of what all of this means for the American military's air campaign doctrine and for every air force in the world that operates or plans to operate stealth aircraft in contested environments. The F-35's radar stealth is real, effective, and continues to provide the aircraft with survivability advantages against radar-guided threats that no other fighter jet in the world can match. The specific missions the F-35 has executed over Iran throughout this conflict, deep penetration strikes on IRGC command infrastructure, CAD support, sensor fusion for coordinated strike packages, are missions that would have been prohibitively costly for non-stealth aircraft to attempt, and that the F-35 has continued executing. The single engagement in which an F-35 was struck by the Majid AD-08 did not end in the aircraft's destruction. It diverted and landed safely at a U.S. base, with damage that confirmed the hit, but not a catastrophic loss. The aircraft survived. The pilot flew it home. That outcome is itself a testament to the F-35's survivability design. But the damage, confirmed by multiple independent technical analysis outlets, is the operational data point that changes the mission planning calculus for every future engagement. An aircraft that absorbs a hit and survives is not the same aircraft that entered the threat environment. And the mission planning assumptions that put that aircraft in the specific engagement geometry where the Majid could reach it are now under urgent review at every air force from Washington to Seoul to Tel Aviv to London. The Warrior Maven analysis identified the specific operational question that urgency is focused on. Did the F-35 descend to an altitude where its thermal signature was detectable at Majid engagement ranges? If yes, can mission profiles be modified to keep the aircraft at altitudes where the Majid cannot reach it while still accomplishing the target set the mission requires? And if the answer to that second question is no, if some target sets require the aircraft to descend into the Majid's engagement envelope, then the question becomes what electronic and kinetic countermeasures can be developed and deployed specifically to defeat passive infrared engagement. The F-35's electronic warfare suite is extraordinarily capable against radar threats. Against a system that emits nothing, the electronic warfare calculus is different. You cannot jam a passive sensor. You can try to decoy it with advanced flares that match the spectral profile the sensor is looking for, but as the Verba ManPads analysis shows, the multi-channel spectral discrimination of modern passive IR seekers makes traditional flare decoying significantly less reliable than it was against older single-channel seekers. The answer may ultimately be kinetic, destroying the Majid operator before the system fires, using ISR collection to map the mobile deployments and strike them preemptively. But that requires knowing where the Majid is before it shoots, and a system that emits no radar signature is specifically designed to deny that knowledge until the moment it fires. Iran did something that the doctrinal assumptions of American air power said should not be possible after a comprehensive SEAD campaign. The Majid AD-08 engaged an F-35. A Chinese-supplied ManPads brought down an F-15E. A Shahed drone struck an Apache, 3 aircraft, 3 different weapon systems. all passive infrared, all operating after the radar network was gone. The assumption that destroying the radar network means owning the airspace has been revised in combat over Iran at the cost that combat revision always requires. Every air force in the world is now working through what that revision means for how they plan, equip, and fly. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the next chapter of this story is not over Iran. It is in the doctrine documents being rewritten right now in Washington, Tel Aviv, Seoul, London, and Paris. Drop your assessment in the comments. Watch the next video right here. Before we close, 3 more threads deserve full treatment because they connect Iran's passive infrared achievement to the broader technological and strategic competition that the rest of the world is now urgently processing. The first is the specific distinction between radar stealth and infrared stealth, and why the F-35's designers knew about this vulnerability and built around it in ways that the March 2026 engagement tested at the limits. Radar stealth is achieved through shaping and materials. The specific angular geometry of every external surface is designed to scatter radar energy away from the transmitting antenna rather than reflecting it back. The radar absorbent coatings on the skin of the aircraft absorb a portion of the radar energy that the shaping cannot completely scatter. The result is a radar cross-section in the high-frequency bands that fire control radars use that is genuinely minuscule, the size of a small bird or a golf ball, depending on the aspect angle and frequency band in question. Infrared stealth is fundamentally different and significantly harder to achieve because the source of the infrared signature is the aircraft's own propulsion system. A jet engine burning fuel produces heat. That heat radiates. You can reduce the infrared signature through careful engine placement, exhaust shaping that mixes hot exhaust gases with cooler bypass air before they exit the aircraft, and nozzle designs that reduce the direct line of sight to the hottest components of the engine. The F-35 incorporates all of these features, but it does not eliminate the infrared signature. It reduces it compared to non-stealth aircraft, while leaving a signature that an advanced EO IR sensor can detect at the ranges that the Majid AD-08 operates at when the aircraft is in the low-altitude engagement geometry. This is not a design failure. It is the fundamental physics of what radar stealth can and cannot achieve. The F-35's designers knew this limitation and built the aircraft's tactics, techniques, and procedures around operating at the altitudes and speeds where the thermal signature, while detectable in theory, is not detectable from ground-based sensors at operationally significant ranges. The March 2026 engagement revealed that the specific mission profile required for the deep penetration strike in question brought the aircraft into the envelope where those assumptions needed to be tested against an adversary who had specifically built a system to exploit them. The test did not go well. The aircraft was hit. It survived. The doctrine is now being revised. The second thread is the Yemen precedent that Military Watch magazine's analysis of the F-35 engagement specifically cited, because the confirmation that passive infrared systems have achieved air defense kills against Western aircraft in other theaters changes the analytical weight of the Iran engagement from unprecedented to part of a pattern. Military Watch confirmed Iran's successful targeting of an F-35 is not entirely unprecedented, with the country having supplied advanced infrared-guided air defense systems to strategic partners in Iraq and Yemen, which have used them to target fighter aircraft in the past. This has included multiple confirmed shoot-downs of F-15s, F-16s, and Eurofighters by Ansarullah coalition forces in Yemen using infrared-guided air defense systems, as well as the destruction of over a dozen U.S. MQ-9 Reaper unmanned aircraft. The Houthi air defense campaign in Yemen has been, since 2015, one of the most intensive and sustained asymmetric air defense campaigns against advanced Western aircraft and drones in recent history, and it has been run almost entirely on passive infrared systems that Iran supplied, trained, and in some cases directly operated. The shoot-down of F-15s and Eurofighters by Houthi forces using Iranian-supplied IR-guided systems is the combat history that Iran's own air defense doctrine development drew on when designing the Majid and deploying it against American aircraft over Iranian territory. The Yemen laboratory confirmed what works. The Majid applied the confirmation to fifth-generation aircraft. The progression is not coincidental. The third thread is the implications for the AUKUS program and every other allied F-35 operator that the Armenia Majid parade reveal has set in motion. The Majid AD-08 is now being exported. Armenia has it with an enhanced configuration that adds active radar to the passive EO IR baseline. Iran has supplied passive IR systems to Yemen, Iraq, and now Armenia. The 9K-333 Verba manpads. Russia, sold to Iran under the $580 million contract, is a system that Russia is also supplying to other state and non-state actors in its network. Every future conflict in which an F-35 operates, whether a Taiwan Strait scenario, a Korean Peninsula contingency, or ongoing counterterrorism operations in environments where adversaries have access to Russian or Iranian weapons transfers, now involves an adversary who has the historical precedent and the technical documentation of Iran's March 2026 engagement as a planning reference. The F-35's manufacturers and the air forces operating it are not sitting still. Lockheed Martin's F-35 Program Office, the U.S. Air Force's Tactical Requirements Development Process, and Allied Air Force Doctrine Commands are all working on the question of how to update tactics, techniques, and procedures, electronic countermeasure suites, and mission planning tools to account for what happened over central Iran in March 2026. Whether those updates produce a solution before the next conflict that involves F-35s and adversaries armed with passive IR systems is the question that the next chapter of this story will answer. For now, Iran did something the doctrine said shouldn't happen. The Majid AD-08 was the system that made it happen. And the world's air forces are reading the engagement data with urgency that has not existed in stealth aircraft survivability analysis since the F-117 was shot down over Yugoslavia in 1999 by a radar that saw it precisely because the pilots flew the same route at the same time too many nights in a row. History does not repeat exactly, but the lesson is consistent. Stealth is not invincibility, and the adversary who figures out what the stealth is hiding from and looks with a different instrument will eventually find the aircraft. Iran found it, and now everyone knows what they used to do it. Subscribe, turn on notifications, drop your take in the comments, watch the next video right here. And let's close with the F-117 comparison explicitly, because it is the historical precedent that every defense analyst is reaching for when they try to explain the significance of the March 2026 F-35 engagement. And the comparison is both illuminating and precisely limited in ways that matter. On March 27, 1999, a Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk stealth attack aircraft was shot down over Serbia by a Soviet-era S-125 Niva surface-to-air missile, a system that the F-117's designers had assessed as too old and too frequency-limited to constitute a serious threat to their aircraft. The Serbian commander who achieved the shoot-down, Zoltan Dani, did so through an operational insight rather than a technological breakthrough. He used a lower-frequency radar band, a VHF radar, that exploited the same resonance effect in the F-117's shaping that Chinese YLC-8 Beaky and similar radars use to detect stealth aircraft today. He operated his radar in extremely short bursts to avoid the harm missiles that were hunting him. He picked the moments when the F-117 was flying a predictable route, and he got lucky once in an environment where the American side had grown operationally complacent about route variation and timing discipline. The lesson Washington drew from that 1999 shoot-down was incorporated into every subsequent stealth aircraft's design and operational doctrine: route variation, timing unpredictability, never flying the same profile twice, electronic warfare coverage for every penetrating mission. The F-35 is the product of those lessons, and yet, March 2026, a different technology, not a VHF radar, a passive EO-IR sensor that emits nothing, not the same operational complacency failure. The F-35 was on a specific mission that required a specific flight profile, and the Majid AD-08 was waiting at the geometry that specific mission profile required. The comparison to the F-117 is not that both shootdowns happened, because American operators made the same mistake. It is that both shootdowns happened because an adversary who studied American stealth aircraft carefully enough found the specific gap between what the stealth was designed to hide and what the adversary was looking with. In 1999, it was VHF radar and operational predictability. In 2026, it was passive EO-IR at low altitude during weapons employment. The lesson is not that stealth doesn't work. The lesson is that stealth is a capability with specific design parameters, and that an adversary who invests in understanding those parameters and builds or acquires the right sensor to look outside them will eventually find the aircraft. Iran found it. The Majid found it. And now the doctrine documents are being rewritten exactly as they were after Serbia in 1999 to make sure the next adversary who tries has a harder time. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Watch the next video right here. One final point that deserves to be stated plainly, because the competitor script's title calls this a total catastrophe for the U.S. military, and that framing requires honest calibration. The F-35 engagement was not a catastrophe. The aircraft was hit, it diverted, it landed safely, and the pilot flew home. The F-15E Dude 44 shootdown was catastrophic in the moment. An aircraft destroyed, 2 aviators in enemy territory, but both crew members were recovered alive in the most extraordinary combat search and rescue operation in a generation. The Apache crew was recovered by a robot boat in under 2 hours. No American pilot has been killed by Iranian air defense fire and left in enemy hands during this conflict. That is not a catastrophe. That is a military that is absorbing serious operational challenges in a genuine contested environment and continuing to complete its missions. What the passive IR engagements represent is not catastrophe. They represent the end of a period of comfortable assumptions. The assumption that destroying the radar network means owning the airspace completely. The assumption that stealth aircraft faced no meaningful threat once the radar-guided tier has been eliminated. Those assumptions are now more qualified. They are not destroyed. The F-35 continues to fly missions over Iran, continues to execute the most demanding strike packages of the conflict, and has not been lost in a confirmed shootdown. But the qualifications matter, and the doctrine revision they require is real. The competitor's total catastrophe framing is the YouTube title. The analytical reality is more precise. Iran forced a doctrinal revision in American stealth aircraft employment in combat, at the cost that combat revision always requires. That is not nothing. It is not catastrophe. It is the specific kind of hard-won operational learning that makes the next conflict slightly less dangerous for the pilots flying it. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Drop your assessment below. Watch the next video right here.